brilliant helps you see math in a new way. From the Pythagorean theorem to the area of a circle, algebra.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics. And today I'm going to talk about a topic in American politics that tends to drive people crazy. No, it's not partisanship or horse race journalism or the state of political punditry, although we could easily do episodes on all three of those, and we might. No, today we're going to look at the election districts and how they shape electoral outcomes, and that means, you guessed it, we're going to talk about gerrymandering. Thank goodness, gerrymandering is a blight on our American election system. It completely thwarts the will of the majority, and it's responsible for our lopsided House of Representatives. Not so fast, my left-wing sore loser friend. Gerrymandering is not nearly as responsible for the 2014 Republican Congress as the fact that people like you self-segregated to urban enclaves of socialism. All right, calm down, clones. Gerrymandering is a little more nuanced than that. Let's talk it out. Congressional apportionment, how many representatives each state gets, is super exciting, even though it only changes every 10 years. Since the number of representatives each state gets is based on population, it's important to know how many people are in each state. That's one reason, at least in the Constitution, that we have a census every 10 years. The most populous state, California, has the largest number of representatives, 53, and the least populous states have only one. Sorry, Alaska, Delaware, the Dakotas, Vermont, and Wyoming, and Montana, and the state of loneliness. One is the loneliest number. In those sparsely populated states, figuring out the election district, which geographic area is represented by a congressman, is easy because there's only one district. This makes elections in these states effectively at-large elections, like a state's choice for senator. Even though there are 2 senators from each state, they represent the entire state at large rather than only a part of it, like representatives are supposed to do. The Electoral College, the system through which Americans choose their president, are also a type of at-large election. The rest of the states are divided into what are called single-member districts. This means that each election district chooses one representative. Now, you might think it would be simple to divide a state into as many pieces as it has representatives, but why would you think that? Nothing is simple. Districts are required to be equal or almost equal in population, and in most states, populations are not evenly distributed across the entire region. The notion that election districts must encompass equal population is the essence of the idea of one person, one vote, a principle that was cast into law by the 1962 Supreme Court decision in Baker versus Carr. It means that a person's vote counts equally no matter where they live, at least as far as the House of Representatives goes. In the Senate, it doesn't actually work out because the resident of a small state like Delaware has the same number of senators, 2 as a resident of California. To put it another way, in 2014, 2 senators represented 897,934 Delawareans, and the same number of senators represented approximately 38 million Californians. In the House, each representative is responsible for about 700,000 to 800,000 people, which is still a lot, but much better than 1 senator for 19 million Californians or 13 million Texans. The idea that people should be equally represented in Congress shouldn't be controversial, and for the most part, it's not. What is controversial is the way that minority groups are represented. One of the problems with single-member districts is that they can make it easier to cut minority groups out of the political landscape. After all, if in a given state only 15% of the residents are minorities, it will be more difficult for them to elect a member of their own group, even under a plurality rule, unless that person can appeal to a large number of non-minority people. Congress and the Supreme Court have tried to remedy this problem by mandating that there be majority-minority districts, which is...
Okay, hi everyone. Okay, so again, just another media resource. It's several years old. It mentions, by the way, in that video I was just showing you that Montana has 1 electoral district in 2015, but since the 2020 census has occurred, Montana's population has increased to the point now that it has 2 congressional representatives, not just 1, 2. So Montana is no longer in the 1 representative category, along with Wyoming and in South Dakota, for example, and Alaska. I think people have been moving to, oh, I hear, by the way, the air raid sirens going off in the background, I guess, in commemoration to the soldiers, the sacrifices and casualties of the Korean War Memorial Day. So I don't know, you might hear that outside your window as well, the air raid sirens, and commemorating the Memorial Day today, which explains why this is only online, because I'm not even certain if the computer rooms are open because the staff's not here. So that's why we're online here. And okay, so the let's go on then, so I don't forget to talk about the lesson plan, and let's talk about the final exam paper, which, as you know, was due on Saturday, and So if you submitted it on time, I've sent it back to you. If you didn't submit it on time, I will look at it. This week. I've got end of semester work to do myself, so I'll get to it some point this week. And then in regard to the final exam, well, I got us here at this at the lesson plan. You notice that we have a debate. Yi Ju Young, is Yi Ju Young here today? Yi Ju Young, are you online? Yi Ju Young, I'm not certain if Yi Ju Young is online, but if Yi Ju Young does not appear on Friday, I'm sorry, on Wednesday, 2 days from today, next 48 hours, Micah, I will be your opponent. So either way, Micah, you will have an opponent in me, or somebody, either Yi Ju Young if he shows up. If not, I will be your opponent on the topic. To South Koreans and democracy, the news media is the marketplace of ideas. And of course, you're reading about the media and social media and its important role in the last election in 2020. And that's pretty much tremendously affected the role of the media and the functioning of media in a democracy, which we have these ideals of people, of course, being informed voters, citizens in a democracy like the United States, being informed voters who get discuss and consider differing points of view through the media and debate and discuss with each other in this marketplace of ideas. But we began to challenge that view long ago, insofar as, for example, we talked about in a previous class, we talked about the different level of political awareness that tends to characterize people. And so I think this is it. Let me see if I can find the old file that we discussed this. Yeah, so let's go back to this file that I showed you, a few weeks back about how research on, in fact, the mass public and the citizens of the United States were somewhat melancholy and disappointing insofar as we have the stereotype that democracies work because we have educated citizens who participate actively in elections and try to seek information, when in fact, long before Facebook, long before Twitter, long before social media and SMS messages, there was already a lot of research and awareness that, you know what, most people don't know much about anything in the United States citizenry, the people that vote in elections. The kind of people that care about these things that we're talking about today, they're like me and you. They're highly attentive, right? That 1% of those people would pass a current events test, that they follow closely news reports. 5% are attentive to politics in the United States. These people, they're moderately attentive at most to politics and current events. They typically use the media as a consumption tool to go find things that are more entertaining, like sports reporting and the like. Then you get down to the levels down here, and it's even worse. And these people, basically, they don't even pay attention to news reports at all. Not even maybe, they don't go beyond what they can pick up on their computer screens and on their television screens. And so this image of the marketplace of ideas as the media being a critical part of a democracy, insofar as it provides the material for people to discuss and consider and debate topics as participants, as citizens in the democratic political system. It's a marketplace for these people, right? For these people, the media is more of an entertainment industry, right? Insofar as, and of course, I'm not judging those people. I mean, I just know that the people like you and me who are up here in terms of being highly attentive and aware of what's going on in the mass public, that's the way we are, and people are the way they are. And I'm not judging these people as bad, irresponsible people. I'm just saying that in society, we have to have a more objective, detached view of how political systems work. But we have this romantic notion, as we talked about earlier, about how the citizenry of a republic of the United States, because America is so powerful and strong, that the people who are citizens of the United States must be highly attentive and concerned about political issues. And when you compare with other countries, for example, you see that, in fact, the United States is pretty low in terms of level of political participation. I mean, as I mentioned in a previous class, right, that in Australian elections, regularly over 90% of eligible voters vote, partly because they're legally required to vote. They get fined if you don't vote. You can be fined the equivalent of 25,000 won if you don't vote. But people were surprised that 67% of eligible voters voted in 2020, which was the highest turnout in American elections in 120 years. So to go back to that debate topic, that's the provocative context for trying to understand this debate topic that we have for our debate, right? That is in fact the media a critical bulwarks that strengthens America and American political system, particularly in competition with during the Cold War, the Soviet Union, or today with the communist system in China or the authoritarian system in Russia and elsewhere, that as part of this supposed greater strength of liberal democracy, critical role is played by the media as the marketplace of ideas. And so you're reading in chapter 10 about what we saw, what the role that social media played in influencing this election. Of course, it had been around long before 2020, but it really exploded in terms of its impact on the of American perceptions and therefore American political behavior by different groups in American society. So, I want to also mention one other thing regarding your final exam paper before I forget. And then I should also remember that we have to do the smart attendance. So let's do the smart attendance before I forget to do that, because I will forget. And if I don't do it now. So let's go to smart attendance, and your smart attendance number is 812. 812 is your smart attendance number. So there you can see the screen. 812 is your smart attendance number. And so let me go to the chat and put 812 in the chat box. Okay, there, it's in the chat box. So as I was saying, regarding the final exam paper, we're going to follow the same format that we followed in the midterm, and that is that we're going to meet and discuss the first draft of your paper and my comments on it. So please, I posted this file on Google Share, and so you can see some people have already gone in there and written in their names. Make sure again that you're able to see this. Have gone in and written in their names as to when they would like to sign up for a meeting with me to discuss. And of course, you can do it on Zoom or you can do it in my office, and it's up to you. To talk about your final exam. And of course, if you're in two classes, we'll spend an hour talking to each other about your papers. So please do that. And all right, so let's go back then to the notes and highlight some interesting points in the notes, because we have to make sure we cover the notes, right? So so let's go through the notes that I sent out and posted for you. And so let me open up those notes. And so I have to find them first. And where, okay, there they are. So let me open those up and let me share the screen so make sure you can see that. So we'll share screen. And there you go, share screen. Okay, so parties presence and the Black electorate's gender gap. And we highlighted a lot in the class about the important role that African Americans played in Donald Trump losing in 2020 to Joe Biden. And primarily they did that in the primaries, right? That was a theme that was highlighted in the previous reading in this book. In the second book, we're using that Black voters overwhelmingly supported Joe Biden and saved Joe Biden, not just him, but of course, played a critical role in Joe Biden's victory, despite the fact that Joe Biden did really poorly in the first, three major events in the primary season, therefore losing in Iowa and in Nevada and New Hampshire. And getting the reputation particularly among those groups of people that are somewhat attentive. Remember the pyramid I was showing you? Those groups, those millions of people that are only somewhat attentive to politics, that they don't pay close attention to newspapers and read intensely and research events. They just know Joe Biden lost. Joe Biden is a loser, loser, loser. So they start thinking, well, if I vote in the primary when it's my turn, if it's in Ohio or if it's in somewhere else or whatever, Joe Biden is a loser. So I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden. That level, that's the consequence of that disengagement among those millions of Americans that can be quite smart and intelligent, but they're not engaged in current affairs. Their awareness, their attention is not focused on political events. And it's not typically just only associating with education level. There are a lot of people with PhDs that are anti-political or non-political, including, scientists. I was, this was a point made by my professor when I was a student years and years and years ago. But I was surprised, for example, just to give you a personal example, for 1 year, I taught at a community college in a rural area of Ohio on the border with Indiana, in Salina, Ohio, population about 10,000 people, about 20 kilometers from the border with Indiana. And it's a farming area, but it has a community college has a relationship or has a connection with a bigger school in close to Dayton, Ohio, called Wright State University, which is a public school called Wright State, W-R-I-G-H-T, named after the Wright brothers, right? I was pleasantly surprised when I went there for 1 year, to teach 1 year, when I was teaching, that this school, Salina, Ohio, was, let me see if I can find it here. I'm going to pull this up. I can do that, right? So you see Wright State Lake Campus. Here is the place I taught in 2006 and 2007, Wright State University Lake Campus. So, and when I got there, I was, wow, this place is in Salina, Ohio. And it's a branch campus of Wright State University located in Jefferson Township. And so, it's got a Wikipedia page, but like if we go to, where is it? Salina. Well, it's in Salina. So this is Salina, and you can see it's in this area here, and it's right next to a lake. There's a big lake. That's why it's called Lake Campus. So close to the border with Indiana. And when I got there, I realized, you know what? That this county, this is in the same congressional district in Ohio, this area, that John Boehner represents. John Boehner was the Speaker of the House when the Republicans last controlled, when they controlled the House of Representatives, had a majority of the seats in the U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Congress. At the time of that crash course U.S. politics video was made that I showed you at the beginning of today's class, John Boehner was the Republican representative of this district. It included my county where I was living, where Salina, Wright State University is located. And I asked the professors who taught, these are professors with master's degrees at least, if not PhDs, and they didn't know that John Boehner was their representative. John Boehner, the most powerful Republican political official in the United States in 2000, at that time in 2007, they didn't know that he was their representative, this most powerful Republican, because this is when George Bush was president of the United States from 2000 to 2008 when I was there. So the point is, I'm saying that when you look at these these notes, and we talk about people being politically aware and attentive, and these people down here not being so politically aware and attentive here, it doesn't necessarily only correlate with religion. There are a lot of people with PhDs who are at the bottom of this pyramid for some reason. And I think they tend to be people that are often a lot of scientists. And so just to I mean, I was shocked. I mean, I'm a political science person. You don't know that you are being represented in the US Congress by the most powerful Republican political official after George W. Bush. And of course, when George Bush lost the election, after Barack Obama became president in 2008, John Boehner became the most powerful Republican in the whole United States. And I was amazed. You don't know that that's who your representative is, John Boehner? But so America's an interesting place, I guess is what I'm saying. So let's go back to the notes that I was covering from the reading, and I think these are the notes. Yeah, here. And okay, so I think you can see that. But in fact, what we did see, to go back to talk about how did Black voters behave in the general election in November 2020. So this chapter is about primarily focusing on what happened in November 2020. Much discussion was made about how in the November 2020 general election that Donald Trump did surprisingly well among Black voters, despite all of his implicit or explicit white bias, white supremacist allegiance, his denigrating statements about other parts of the world that are not white, what he called shithole countries. I mean, that's a quote, right? Why did he do better in November 2020 than he did in November 2016 among Black voters? And so let's talk about Black voters. Of course, this racial conflict between whites and Blacks is critically important for understanding America's political system, going back to the creation of the Constitution and the efforts to reconcile and compromise the North and the South part of the new United States, where slavery was dominant in the Southern economies, and trying to reconcile their conflicting interests and their suspicions and mutual suspicions and intensifying hostilities that would eventually lead to the Civil War, right? In the middle of the 19th century, that conflict between whites and Blacks is critically important. That polarization in American politics in terms of assumptions and worldviews about how the world naturally, obviously functions, is critical for explaining what's going on now, what will happen in November, and what will happen this November, and what will happen in the next presidential election in 2024. And we were talking about critical race theory and all that, being basically new forms of racial polarization, new forms of discourse and expression of this long-standing racial polarization between whites and non-whites in the United States, and whites being basically Europeans, right? So, and people of European heritage. So there was tremendous volatility. So when the presidential campaign began in January 2020, the coronavirus pandemic was raging. Donald Trump escalated the conflict with the United States by ordering the killing of a senior Iranian military leader in January 2020 at the start of the pandemic, for reasons having to do with the shelling or attacks that Trump blamed on the Iranians in the form of military shelling attacks on American bases in Iraq. So Trump responded by ordering the assassination of the second most powerful political figure in Iran, Soleimani, the leader of the Revolutionary Guard forces in Iran. And that's another story, another discussion. But the point is that it seemed to indicate that we're preparing for war with Iran. In addition to the pandemic, in addition to Donald Trump undergoing his first impeachment trial, right, for apparently trying to pressure President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine to announce the launching of an investigation of corruption against the son of Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, who was a businessman who had was engaged in business activities in Ukraine, that Trump was threatening to withhold American military aid to Ukraine unless President Volodymyr Zelensky, a newly elected president in Ukraine, who's of course still there today, would announce publicly that they were beginning an investigation into corruption by Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, one lone surviving son. Because Trump knew that Joe Biden, before anybody else knew, he knew that Joe Biden was his main threat, that Joe Biden was his main political competitor. And this is, of course, in 2019, late 2019, when this crisis is beginning and going on into January 2020, and Donald Trump would be impeached the first time for this action by the democratically controlled House of Representatives. The House had come under Democratic control in the November 2018 elections. And so this all looked like a very dangerous time. Like, was Trump trying to make a war? Is he threatening war with China? With Iran, in order to mobilize the American voters to support him? But clearly viewing that Joe Biden was his main threat. Before Joe Biden won the South Carolina Democratic primary in February 2020, that really indicated that Joe Biden was going to be the nominee. So Trump knew before most people, the majority of American people, that Biden was his main threat, political adversary, not Kamala Harris, not Pete Buttigieg, not Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden. And he was right? So going back to discussion of Black voters, cities in battleground states with pluralities of Black voters, such as Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Atlanta, were primary reasons why these states shifted to Democratic wins in 2020, despite Trump carrying them in 2016. So these states, so this is Detroit's in Michigan, Milwaukee is in Wisconsin, Philadelphia is in Pennsylvania, and Atlanta is in Georgia. These four states voted for Biden in 2020, despite Trump having won them in 2016. And according to this observer, this researcher, it's due to the fact that Black voters played an important role for helping Biden win those states. To the surprise of many, again, for Georgia to vote for a Democrat, it's the first time since Bill Clinton was elected. So Biden won 90% of the Black vote, while Trump won 8%. But there was an increasing divergence within the Black voters, a Black electorate, between male and female Black voters. The Trump campaign knew in 2020 that it was not going to, win a majority of the Black vote. The aim was to put together a winning coalition of voters that would allow, of course, Donald Trump, to win the Electoral College, right? Even if Donald Trump doesn't get a majority or more of the individual votes, he could still win the election the way he won against Hillary Clinton in 2016, despite the fact that Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than he did. So the aim was to just peel off just enough Black support for Biden to prevent Biden from winning the Electoral College. And so there had to be some appeals by Trump to Black voters, not to get a big number of them, but to get enough to win. Given, of course, how other groups would vote. So, for example, Biden did better with suburban white women in 2020 than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. So, and Trump knew that this was a problem, right? So, how did Trump try to get more Black votes? He appealed to them symbolically. He had Black people speak in the 2020 Republican National Convention. African-American men in particular featured prominently in the speaker lineup at the Republican National Convention in the summer of 2020 to formally nominate, launch Trump's presidential reelection as the candidate of it was a big party basically in the summer of 2020, but it was primarily heavily on Zoom because of the pandemic. In less than 2 months before the November 2020 election, Trump launched what we called the Platinum Plan. This Platinum Plan he advertised that the Trump administration advertises a $500 billion package that contained a range of policy proposals to provide Black communities with educational opportunities and economic empowerment. And there were some Black people that endorsed Trump, celebrities, right? I mean, even those people lower down in the pyramid of awareness of political attentiveness, they do like to be entertained. Everybody likes to be entertained. So if some of those people are going to vote, if you can get favored entertainers to endorse Trump or Biden, that makes a difference, right? So the Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee also rolled out endorsements and pro-Trump comments by Black athletes and rappers like Herschel Walker, who, as we talked about previously, is now running for the US Senate in Georgia. 50 Cent, Lil Wayne, right? Well, I guess they're rappers. You might know them better than I do. Alongside what Johnson calls Trump's performative masculinity, right? And the aim was to improve upon the 13% of Black male voters that Trump won in 2016, as well as a significant percentage of Black male electorate that did not vote in 2016. And still, Black women, in particular, Black women remain the most loyal component of the American electorate to the Democratic Party. So, you know, Biden today is very much concerned about many things, including making sure that Black women support him and remain motivated to come out and vote in November of this year and in the 2024 election. Black women in particular. And but Trump and American nationalism and this desire to be allowed to integrate into American society. I mean, people want to belong, right? As a general statement, human beings, you and me, we want to be accepted. We want to be liked. I want people who I deal with and work with and I interact with to get my needs and satisfy my needs. I want them to not hate me. And America, you know, has this stereotype of Black people going back to slavery as being contemptible. And if Trump can make it or make me believe that in that kind of America, we too can join in through a $500 billion plan to promote Black businesses and Black wealth and you know, according to the American dream, open up the American dream to Black people more fully. That's going to be appealing to a lot of people. And it goes beyond Trump. We've been following, for example, the Republican primary election in the United States going on now, right? Beginning in the spring and going on to the summer of 2022. And we talked about at the last class about how Republicans have been having elections in their primaries to select somebody to be their candidate for senator in Pennsylvania. So here's one Wikipedia website covering the 2022 United States Senate election in Pennsylvania. And the person who won is Mehmet Oz. He won the Republican nomination. He was endorsed by Trump. He's Turkish. He's dual US Turkish citizen. I guess he's got some medical program that's really appealing to suburban white housewives. Suburban housewives, they like his show. And that's supposedly one of the reasons why Donald Trump endorsed him to be the Republican candidate for senator in November of this year. And he won by just about 900 votes, defeating this person, a businessman who lost, despite spending lots of his own money. Establishment figure, lost to Mehmet Oz. This person was endorsed by Trump. And he's running against this person, a Democrat, John Fetterman, who's also charismatic, but his health is an issue. But the point I want to make is that to everybody's surprise, this person came in a close third, and she's Black. And she has espoused homophobic and Islamophobic views and has promoted conspiracy theories. And she came in a close third in this election. And she talks more like traditional pro-Trump politicians than Mehmet Oz, for example. But Trump didn't endorse her because Trump thinks that there's no way she's going to win in November. But she came in a close third, and she came in and surprised everybody, right? So what does it say the outcome was in terms of the vote? I think it says, it should have the, it doesn't have the vote count here, but he won, as I said, by less than 1,000 votes over him, but he had, but she came in, that other Black woman came in third. And she made the point that, we do not need Trumpism. You don't need to make America great again with Trump. And what does she highlight? She highlights this traditional American view of conservative American values. She claims, again, she's against abortion rights. She points out that her mother was raped. She claims her mother was raped at the age of 11 by a 22-year-old man. Her mother became pregnant as a result of the rape, which led to her birth on September 6, 1971. She was raised by her mother on a pig farm in the south of the state in a house where her great-great-grandmother, who was born a slave, formerly lived. And she went to school, went to college, and she joined the military, and she's successful. And she has been a professional politician. She is the example of a Black person that is more Trump than Trump. And got a lot of votes. Anti-homosexual rights, anti-Islamic, and she surged in the polls in late March 2020 and started receiving major attention from the news outlets in May. And she came in third, but nobody endorsed her. And she did really well. So for example, here's the result. Mehmet Oz, the Turkish-American doctor, television star, reality TV star, got 31.2% of the vote. McCormick got 31.1% of the vote, and she got 24.7% of the vote. And she's Black. So if you're a Republican strategist, you know this, that there are strong sentiments within the Black electorate of the United States that are potentially persuadable to support a hard right-wing political movement in the United States. So back to the notes. Let me go back to those notes if I can find them. Okay, so make sure that you can see that. So make sure. Okay, so Black men and women in the electorate, since the beginning of the Black electorate, after they were made free and allowed to, given the right to votes, it has demonstrated near uniform electoral performance, except for a few presidential cycles of transition in the mid-20th century. Black men were enfranchised to vote with the 15th Amendment with its ratification in 1870. Black women did not gain the national right to vote until the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920. And then, of course, the Jim Crow laws that unofficially blocked Black voting. The Jim Crow era policies continued to prevent most Blacks from voting. Again, that didn't end until the 1960s, after I was born. This is relatively recent, right? In the early days of the civil rights movement, prevailing leadership stereotypes did not include women. We think about Black leaders. I mean, who does everybody study who studies the American civil rights movement when they are in school? Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, the Black Panthers activists. Women's role is only been a topic in the last several years. Nevertheless, Black women played critical roles in the civil rights movement, though their activity in churches and civil society organizations played critical roles in its successes. And you still see that there's significant differences in how Black women and Black men vote. Okay. So apparently among racial or ethnic minority voting blocks in 2020, the African-American vote was the largest. So it made up 11% of the total electorate that voted. Black men made up 4% of all voters in 2020. Biden won them by 87% to Trump's 12%. Black women constituted 6% of the electorate that voted, but Biden won them. They were 6% of the electorate, not 4%, 6%, unlike black men. So black women are more likely to vote than black men. And among black women, Biden won them by 93 to 96%. Some polling results seem to indicate that Trump was making inroads among the black electorate after black support had been significantly strong for Obama in 2008 and 2012. So some polls indicate that maybe up to 12% of black voters may have voted for Trump in 2020. So in fact, from 1972 to 2004, black women have consistently voted at higher rates than black men. So black women are more likely to vote than black women are more likely to vote than black men. By a difference of 5 to 10% in presidential elections. And black men are more predisposed by almost double likelihood to vote against the Democrat compared to black women. In 2008, when Barack Obama first ran for president, the black gender gap closed to 1%. More than 95% of black voters voted for Obama. But then in 2012, when Mitt Romney was the Republican nominee for president, the gender gap reappeared, with black men 3 times more likely to vote for the Republican candidate, Mitt Romney. So in other words, he's pointing out, this Professor Johnson, that the black electorate was rather returning to regular patterns that had prevailed among the black electorate before Obama ran for president in 2008. The 1964 presidential election witnessed the black electorate's realignment to the Democratic Party en masse. So, of course, the Democratic Party had dominated the South, the old Confederacy, after the Civil War until after World War II, because it was opposed to the Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln that defeated the South in the war. And when the Democratic Party in the 60s, beginning actually after World War II, in late 1940s, but particularly into the 1960s, the Democratic Party controlled government with Lyndon Johnson as president and the Democratic Party controlling the Senate and the House by big majorities. They passed lots of vitally important civil rights legislation. And as a result, white people ended up moving in the South towards the Republican Party, and the black people moved towards the Democratic Party. So a flip. And now the American South, the old Confederacy, is the base perhaps of the Republican Party of the United States. Like, you just know, Texas, Florida, in presidential elections, they're likely to vote Republican. Joe Biden, if he is running for re-election in 2024, he's not going to try, even bother to spend money, campaign finance resources to buy media coverage and advertisement media time on Texas television, because he knows Texas is going to vote Republican, probably. Although, again, maybe the upcoming overturning of Roe versus Wade by the US Supreme Court this month, if it happens, and the ongoing crisis of gun violence might cause a change. But people have been talking in these terms for years and years and years in Texas, and Texas consistently, they have not elected a Democrat to a statewide office in Texas, either as a governor or a senator or secretary of state or secretary of any kind of statewide office in Texas since 1994. So almost 30 years. 28 years, there's never been a Democrat elected to a statewide office. So is it going to happen this year or in 2024? Is the overturning of Roe versus Wade going to cause much more women to turn out to vote for Democrats? Probably, I don't think so. So, but the point is that Texas and the southern states, again, surprisingly, not including Georgia, because Georgia did vote for Biden, is now, in a sense, the base of the Republican Party. But back to the notes. Black men have consistently been more open to the Republican Party's messaging than Black women. Black men have been more receptive to conservative appeals to free market capitalism, individualism, and self-determination. Again, it appeals to certain expressions of Black masculinity, including this long denied ideal of personal agency of individual effort leading to achievement. Again, you know, I mean, think Jim Crow, right? That for 400 years, Black people have been portrayed as deserving of subordinate status, of inferior status, that Black people are inferior in politics and in political position and in social status because they're less than white people. And, you know, I mean, it's difficult to imagine what it's like to live in that kind of environment, right? Maybe Koreans have some idea when Korea was part of the Japanese Empire and the Japanese denigrated Koreans as being backward and inferior and benefiting from Japanese imperialism. But it's something that white Americans just don't understand and don't want to understand, right? And they deny that they're racist. They point to people like Barnett, that Black woman I was pointing to you, or Herschel Walker. We're not against Black people. We love Black people if they have the right values, if they have the American creed. And if you're allowed in, if you can make yourself believe that Donald Trump's going to let that happen, is going to allow me to be part of the American dream by opening up market business opportunities, you know, a lot of people are going to want to believe that. So 25% of Black Americans identify as conservative, but less than 10% of Black voters voted Republican. So what does conservative mean? Like, I mean, you might have know something about hip hop culture, right? A lot of their music is anti-women and anti-gay, and it gives you a sense that there's this hostility among some significant segment of the Black electorate to notions of non-traditional gender norms. The Trump campaign also highlighted its passage of the 2018 First Step Act. It was a federal prison reform that the Trump administration claimed particularly benefited incarcerated Black men. Yeah, keep that in mind, right? That up until at least the Biden administration, until this law was passed, let's say until 2018, the United States had 2.2 million people in prison. 2.2 million people. That's 2% of the adults. 2% out of every 100 American adults were in prison. That's amazing. 2 out of every 100 American adults was in prison. And of course, the comparison was made with China that supposedly had 1 million. But China, of course, is 4 times the size of the United States and had 1 million people in prison. Now, that number back in 2018 didn't include, I don't think included the Uyghurs, the people that are in Chinese, what they call vocational and job training camps, where they claim that they're training Muslim Uyghurs in learning skills for getting a good job, because if they get good jobs and get material prosperity and well-being, that they'll be less likely to be susceptible to Islamic radicalism. But other people call those basically concentration prison camps. So maybe it's more than 1 million people are incarcerated in China. But let us say it's 2 million, but still China's 4 times the size of the United States. So what does that mean? I mean, isn't that a sign that there's something wrong with the United States? And this is the topic of discussion in critical race theory and, you know, white supremacy and systemic racism that typically white people and particularly white voters just don't want to hear. And of course, Republicans keep claiming that the Democratic Party is anti-white. The Trump campaign also, so this First Step Act began the process of changing some of the sentencing laws in the US court system to put a lot of Black men in jail. And for example, changing laws so that, for example, if well, technical. I mean, we're not talking about massive releases of people that were in prison, but it was a beginning of a process to try to address this crisis of 2.2 million people incarcerated, and half of those people, almost half of those people, being non-white, being Hispanic and Black, even though Black people are only 12% of the population and Hispanic people are 15% of the population. Almost half of the people in prison are Black or Hispanic. So, he began, again, the trick was, the aim was to just get enough support for Trump among Black men that Trump would be able to win critical states in the 2020 elections. So the Trump campaign also pointed historically low Black unemployment rate. The economy was doing well until the pandemic hit, right? The Trump campaign broadcast a campaign advertisement with an all-Black cast during the 2020 Super Bowl. I watched that, highlighting again Black people benefiting from Trump's policies, including the First Step Act and that was mentioned here. The Trump campaign's ad towards Blacks implicitly targeted Black men being more likely to be swayed than Black women. Again, the focus here is that maybe you can get some Black men to vote for Trump, more Black men. And in the 2020 election, however, upended the Trump campaign. The poor handling of the coronavirus really illustrated the differences in health between whites and non-white people, between whites and colored people, people of color. It tend to be people of color, poor people that have other what was called comorbidities. Other problems and health problems are great among poor people for a variety of reasons that made them more vulnerable to the Corona-19 virus. So for example, if you're obese, you're more likely to get terribly ill and die from Corona-19 than if you're not obese. If you have diabetes, you're more likely to get terribly sick and die from the coronavirus than if you're not having diabetes. And of course, if you're heavily overweight, you can get diabetes. Other problems, asthma, any other disease you have is called a comorbidity that makes the danger of COVID-19 more deadly. Black unemployment tripled in May 2020 because of the shutdown of the economy to try to restrict the spread of the virus, undercutting the economic appeal. Black people were less likely to work from home, like we could here as professors and teachers. Black people were more likely, people of color were more likely to work in healthcare, working as aides to nurses, to clean up after patients, to work in restaurants and factories and so on. Then Trump's callous response to the George Floyd killing by a Minneapolis police officer, threatening violence against the protesters, protesting against quote unquote systemic racism, using language from the Jim Crow era, like when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Again, that's what was said by white officers and politicians in the 1960s against the Black demonstrations and riots during the violent protests against the Vietnam War and oppression and police violence. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. Trump, he repeated that. The Black Lives Matter protests, together with the pandemic emergency closures, also helped motivated voter interest in the election. So again, we have high turnout in the election. Democrats, and this is still the case today, right? That maybe more people in America are more sympathetic to the Democratic Party, but they're also less likely to vote, right? Particularly in elections that do not involve electing a president, like this coming election in November 2022. Young people, poor people are less likely to vote even though they're more likely to be pro-Democrat. So that's always been a main focus for the Democratic Party, how to get these people to come out to vote when their lives make it more difficult to vote. They can't take time off to vote. Voting day is not a holiday the way it is here in Korea on June 1. June 1 was a holiday because you had elections here in Korea for the local government. So it was a holiday, so people didn't have to go to work, so they could vote. You don't have that in the United States. People that work office jobs like I have and others, they have more flexible work schedules. We might have a lot of work, but we can take time off and go vote. You can't do that if you have to work in a hospital or you have to work at in a store as a retailer. So, and of course, there have also been research to show that policy appeals are not going to be sufficient to widen or lessen the Black gender gap among Black voters. So there's some issues that people tend to assume that Black people are going to be very concerned about. And in fact, Johnson's claiming that we see that there is not a really significant division among Blacks and white people. I mean, sorry, among Blacks, men and women, I should say, regarding, for example, affirmative action. Like Black men and Black women, they don't care more about affirmative action compared to each other or feminist issues. So in other words, these issues might be more important for white people, but they're not so important for Black people in terms of a polarizing issue to get people to vote on the basis of their gender around a policy issue. They're not so important for Black people. Instead, research shows that the only statistically significant factor shaping the behavior of Black voters to support a presidential challenger is the challenger's views on civil rights and the challenger's partisan affiliation. So a challenger means somebody moving against an incumbent. So that means Biden is the challenger against the incumbent Trump. Similar findings emerged regarding Black voter evaluation of congressional candidates who are running against an incumbent president who is campaigning primarily economic empowerment as the better approach to improve the socioeconomic status of Blacks. See, the aim in this chapter is to try to understand the supposed better performance of Trump in 2020 with Black voters overall compared with 2016. How could that happen after George Floyd protests, Trump's condemnation of Black Lives Matter protests, the pandemic response? How could he do better? And the key that this chapter is focusing on is that Black voters went back to performing the way they typically do before Barack Obama was elected in 2000, before Barack Obama ran for president in 2008. Biden got some benefit because he was Obama's vice president. Research also seems to indicate that Black voters seem to focus most significantly on the candidate's position on abortion, the candidate's party, the candidate's civil rights approach, the Black unemployment rate, the candidate's race, and the candidate's stance on same-sex marriage, the crime rate, and the overall status of the economy. You know, abortion is a sensitive topic. I mean, of course, what people like Barnett and others argue is that, you know, white people want to keep abortion legal, Many white people want to keep abortion legal because they don't want so many Black people to be born in the United States. So that's an argument made by conservative Blacks that it's basically legal abortion is a form of slow motion genocide against Black and brown people, because poor people are more likely to have families, bigger families, more children, that abortion should be legal to limit those numbers. They make that claim, that this is part of a white effort to keep Black numbers down as a percent of the population. That can be a potentially very powerful appeal. Research also seems to indicate that Black voters tend to focus on evaluating the performance of incumbent office holders and less on the promises of a candidate. So I mean, there's a lot to cover here, so I don't know if I really want to cover it all here. Black gender differences do exist in voting behavior, however, despite not having much difference, for example, on women's right to choose whether or not to have an abortion, not being really significant difference between Blacks and whites. Gender differences among Blacks do appear. Research seems to indicate that Black women tend to prioritize policy, party, and present conditions in society in evaluating candidates for office, including the incumbent. Black men are significantly more prone to emphasize party and the attributes of the candidate, namely race and experience. Black men do not emphasize the party of the candidates as much as Black women do. So what impact did Kamala Harris have as Joe Biden's vice presidential running mate? So Biden's selection of Kamala Harris to be his running mate may have tapped into the preference of Black male voters for Black candidates, which is stronger than among Black women voters. Okay, again, we're talking about battling around small numbers, margins of voters in the electoral college system where, you know, a few thousand votes can determine whether or not a state goes, electoral college votes of one state goes for Trump versus Biden. The Trump campaign's efforts is to highlight its Black supporters could not compete with Kamala Harris and Biden. Perhaps, Johnson suggests, if Trump had selected a Black running mate in 2020 to replace Mike Pence, he might have been more successful. You know, that's not been done in my life. I can't remember a president who was an incumbent running for re-election who chose a different person as his vice president for his second term. So it would have been a first if Trump had gotten rid of Pence and brought in, for example, Tim Scott of South Carolina, Black Republican senator from South Carolina, to be his running mate. Maybe that would have turned the election for Trump. But he didn't do that. The Trump campaign's 2020 focus on policy criticisms on the Democratic leadership was not successful in motivating more Black men to vote for Trump. You know, policy criticisms, like policy position criticisms, appeal more to Black women, relatively speaking, and Black women would more likely react negatively to the policy attacks of the Trump campaign on the Democrats regarding civil rights and social welfare programs during the pandemic. So policy issues and policy criticisms are more motivating for Black women. And Trump's attacks on Biden's proposals for civil rights reform and dealing with the pandemic probably alienated Black women more than Black men. So again, you know, Biden won Georgia by 11,000 votes. Only 11,000 votes. To gain just a small margin of votes Trump needed to win, for example, in Georgia, Trump should have emphasized himself more as a hyper-masculine outsider businessman. This would have appealed just to enough Black men that maybe he could have pulled off the win in Georgia. The racial partisan polarization of whites around the Republican Party and people of color gravitating the Democratic Party is likely to continue, but not as strongly as people expect or some people assume. Like, we can't assume that Black people and Hispanic people are automatically going to stay Democratic forever. We're always seeing that shift happen, including particularly among Hispanics, Hispanic Americans. Black voters are not becoming more conservative. Republican charges that the Democrats take for granted Black voters and so ignore them is not likely to be an effective electoral strategy. What is more useful for Republicans? Descriptive representation is important. That is, for example, having Black candidates run for office as Republicans is probably more important in increasing Black voter turnout. And we are seeing that with the Republican Party today. In running for 2022 in Congress, more Blacks, more women among the Republican candidates. It is particularly true regarding Black women. In the 117th Congress House of Representatives, of 212 Republicans, in other words, this current Congress, only 2 are Black, and both are freshmen, first time elected Republicans. In the Senate, only 2 Republicans are Black. Tim Scott was one in South Carolina. There are no Black Republican mayors of major cities in the United States. There has never been a Black Republican governor, with one short-term exception, Louisiana, right after the Civil War. So expanding the Black gender gap in presidential elections to get more Black men to vote for Republicans means you have to find more viable Black nominees for office. Like, that makes a difference. Does that candidate look like me? The 2020 Trump campaign demonstrated the inability of Republicans to succeed in expanding its outreach to Blacks. Okay, again, that's, at the time of the writing of the book. So let's look at the other files that I have here. To highlight some of these issues. Oh, I thought I had some. Well, let's. I guess I don't have it here, but no. Okay, let's go back and talk about social media. Well, let me see here. Let me see what I got things lined up that I wanted to show here. And so we go to vote. And okay. Okay. So here's a question I have for you. Here's an article from a few years ago about the Republican Party becoming the party of white identity. And this began, of course, in the 1960s when the Democratic Party under Lyndon Johnson and a Democratic Congress adopted far-reaching civil rights legislation. So this is from a few years back, 3 years ago. In the fall of 1974, in this op-ed piece in New York Times, it states, in the fall of 1974, the Chicago Tribune anointed Linda Taylor the welfare queen, reporting that she received public aid checks and food stamps while driving a Cadillac and planning a Hawaiian vacation. An Illinois bureaucrat declared that Taylor was responsible for the most massive case of welfare fraud that was ever perpetrated in the 50 states. Ronald Reagan then shone a spotlight on Taylor and her crimes, asserting during his 1976 presidential run, which he lost, of course, that she used 80 aliases and that her tax-free cash income alone has been running at $150,000 a year. In a recording of one campaign event, you can hear the crowd emit a collective gasp when Reagan recites that enormous dollar figure. So Ronald Reagan, of course, was president from 1980 to 1988. He's considered to be a superhero in the United States, among at least among Republicans, because he supposedly led the United States in defeating communism. Linda Taylor became the living template for a racist stereotype, the greedy Black woman getting rich off taxpayer money. That vicious, baseless caricature demonized some of the nation's most vulnerable people, laying the groundwork for bipartisan welfare reforms that slash direct aid to the poor. And the Taylor-inspired trope continues to haunt our political conversation as elected officials claim that aid programs are plagued by fraud and call for food stamp recipients to be banned from purchasing luxury items like lobster. There is no evidence that people get food stamps eating a disproportionate amount of lobster. You see that on Fox News, right? Fox News would have reports about how people are using their food stamps program to provide food to people who don't have any money to buy food, enough food, that they're using the food stamps to buy luxury items like lobster. While the welfare queen stereotype endured, Linda Taylor herself has been totally forgotten. At the height of her infamy in the mid-1970s, Taylor wasn't just depicted as a brazen thief. She was seen as a shapeshifter, a woman who used dozens of aliases and her own racial ambiguity to bet her scams. Her skin is sallow, like a medium yellow, and she has no features that make her peculiar to any racial background, a detective explained in one national news item about Taylor. So she passes as a Filipino. She puts on a black wig and becomes a Negro. And with other makeup and wigs, she passes for white. Another article said that Taylor, who in 1970 self-identified as Black, was able to pass for a Spanish, Filipino, and white. So as I researched Taylor's life decades later, I discovered that much of what had been said about her was inaccurate, misleading, or worse. Taylor, who died in obscurity in 2002, hadn't actually pilfered, stolen that is, $150,000 in welfare money in a single year. Her take was estimated at $40,000 over many years, and she was officially charged with stealing around $9,000. And welfare fraud, it turned out, was the least of her crimes. Taylor was a known kidnapper. In the 1970s and 80s, 3 people who she'd become close to ended up dead under suspicious circumstances. These disturbing instances were never adequately investigated. The press, politicians, and government officials saw Taylor as the country's biggest welfare cheat. Nothing else she'd done, no matter how heinous, could overpower that image. At least one part of the Linda Taylor legend was true. She had no fixed identity. She changed her name and appearance constantly. Taylor had picked up that habit from an early age. As a child in the Deep South, the Confederacy, right? The color of her skin had marked her as a target, someone whose very existence was seen as a shameful mistake. So my question to you is, given what we've been reading in this week's readings and these kind of reports, do you think racism is part of American political DNA? Is racism part of American political DNA? So let me go back to the breakout rooms and assign you to groups, and in groups of 3. And so open these rooms. So please join the rooms. Micah, Kim Byung-koo, Cho Jin, Anais, Chundujin, Juliet, please join the groups. So Kim Byung-koo, Jo Jin, join room 1. Anais, Chundujin, Juliet, join room 2. Anais, Chundujin, Juliet. Anais, Juliet. Anais. And so please respond to this issue as to whether or not you think your group believes that racism is in the political DNA of the United States, to get us talking about these topics a little more fully, a little more completely, before we go on to the next set of information. And so who's going to speak for the groups? And let's see here. So heads, it's the bottom person each group, and it's tails. So it's the top person each group. And that means it's going to be Micah and Anais are going to speak first. So Micah will speak first. So help Micah. Micah, take charge of the group. Anais, take charge of room 2 and prepare to respond to this question. And I shall write a statement as well. And heads, I'm 1, 2, or 3. And I'm a head. So heads, I'm a 1. I'm a tail. So heads, I'm a 2. Okay, I agree. That racism is part of American political DNA. So what do I mean by that? I was assigned 2. Okay. All right. So who's going to speak first? And so heads, it's Micah. Tails, it's Anais. And it's heads. So Micah, what is your response?
So I said that, yes, it's part of the American political DNA because racism race is a huge topic in the US, and you can't really separate the two. It's part of how people identify. A lot of people vote based on their identity. So I feel like it always enters, it's always going to enter the picture, it's always going to enter the debate, and also more so politics, more so policies that influence people's lives. So I think it has and it always will sort of have a part of the American political DNA.
Okay,
Because-
well, then, Micah, then how do you respond to somebody who says, well, how can you say that? We elected a Black man president of the United States twice, in 2008 and 2012. I mean, I mean, what more evidence do you need that America is not fundamentally racist if Americans elect a Black man president twice and a Black woman as vice president? And, you know, there are 2 Black senators in the United States. And there are Black people that support Donald Trump, including Herschel Walker, and running for Senate now in Georgia. I mean, when is America, if electing Barack Obama president is not definitive evidence that America is not fundamentally racist, how can you say it's not fundamentally evidence that America is not racist? I mean, how do you respond to your election of Obama?
I mean, just because you had a Black man elected as president doesn't mean that the US does not have a racism problem. Like, the racism problem still persists, and I guess a lot of people also voted for Obama because they per se always vote Democrat, or they found the other candidate not being suitable, and in that aspect they didn't really care what sort of ethnicity he has. So I don't think, yeah, that's what I would respond.
Okay, so how about who's next? Anais, you're in the group 2. Where do you fit on the scale? Where does your group fit here?
Yes, so we also agreed. Yes, because the United States were founded at the beginning of slavery, and even when slavery became almost prohibited, and they still had the Jim Crow.
Uh-huh.
So I think, yeah, it still stays nowadays.
But then again, how do you respond to the fact that the United States elected a black man president twice? And he's not a conservative man. Barack Obama didn't talk like Donald Trump. He didn't talk like Clarence Thomas. He doesn't talk like Catherine Barnett, who almost who did well in the Senate Republican primary election in Pennsylvania. He didn't talk like he was a progressive. He was a liberal, and he was elected not once but twice. How do you respond?
I think that still some people want to see things evolve, and if they I don't have the words, but if their opinion is more similar to the to some presidents, they will still prefer to have their opinion listened to.
Okay, I wrote this. Yes, racism is part of, I mean, I was assigned to do this because I flipped a coin. So I was agreed. Yes, racism is part of American political DNA because of the foundation of the United States, race-based settler colonialism. It's the foundation of the US in race-based settler colonialism. America was founded on the justification basis of racial white supremacy, and it permeates American politics and institutions to the present. Let me hear what other people in the group have to add. Let's see. Heads, Kim Pyong-koo, tails, Cho Jin for room 1. And it's Cho Jin. Cho Jin, where do you fit on this scale?
I don't think racism is the DNA of American politics because there is a variety of races in the US Congress recently. Of course, there were times when Trump and other white supreme racists grew up in the United States. But after information technology, I think that DNA has faded a lot because it's more important to embrace them and assimilate them as Americans.
Okay, yeah, America has a strong assimilationist tendency, right? That, and, you know, it represents, as we talked about earlier, how Irish Catholic people, whom Americans consider white today, 150 years ago, 180 years ago, were despised by the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant core group that settled America, right? The Protestants from England and Scotland that settled the United States. They hated the Catholic Irish. They didn't view them as equal to them. And then later, but then they've assimilated into the white core group, right? Same is true with the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant core group. We talked about how people from Southern Europe, Italians, were not considered fully white at the beginning of the 20th century. And something similar may be going on with Hispanics and maybe even with African Americans, if they're able to assimilate, if they're able to be prosperous. This desire, as highlighted in that Johnson chapter that you read, we just covered, that what seems to count more for Republican efforts to be successful in appealing to Black votes, particularly Black men, is to have people run as candidates who look like them. So I don't have the report, but there was ready right now, but there was a news report yesterday about how the Republican Party, in preparing for the upcoming elections in November, is fielding more Black and non-white candidates. And so again, and of course, as I said, right, white people in the Republican Party, they deny that they're racist. They love Black people as long as Black people say the right things, as they talk in terms of the American creed. Small government, private enterprise, laissez-faire, right? express the belief that we're all evaluated by what our capabilities, not our backgrounds, popular participation, and elements of also the belief that you can be successful through your own efforts. If you talk in those terms, you are going to be accepted into the Republican Party, and so we'll see. We'll see. I mean, in terms of what it means. Let's go on to the next group. So Chung Do-jin is heads, Juliet is tails. Chung Do-jin, where do you fit on the scale?
I also agree that the United States racist DNA is still remain for now, because there is still a candidate like a Trump that he still say the words that against the citizens who are not non-whites, and although the non-whites, the foreign states, and so then the voters also voters wouldn't. Then actually the voters who are non-white identities are reluctant to vote for the Republicans because of that strong speeches. So it is absolute that the racist features are still influence in the voting of political events in United States. Yes.
Yeah. So you're saying, you make an excellent point, that you're saying the evidence that there's strong American institutionalized racism in its political form is manifested not in the election of Barack Obama. I mean, the most important evidence is the election of Trump. The election of Trump is the evidence of systemic racism, because Trump was largely a reaction to Barack Obama's presidency, and Barack Obama's promotion of values which appeared to challenge traditional conservative notions of proper behavior in America. I mean, Barack Obama pushed for LGBTQ rights. Barack Obama used his position as president to issue directives to the thousands of schools in America, right? He sent them a letter from his administration to all the thousands of schools in America that they have to accommodate transgender students. And if they don't, there could be problems. So in other words, accommodating transgender students can mean different things. Like if a person identifies as a female, a woman, she should be allowed to use a female bathroom. And you can imagine how many American people would react hostilely to that. In these small towns like where I'm from in Louisville, to help Barack Obama's Secretary of Education send out a directive to a letter to that school saying you have to accommodate transgender students somehow. It was infuriating. And then Barack Obama endorses Hillary Clinton to become the president of the United States in 2016, to continue his efforts to undermine traditional American values. Now, somebody who supports Trump and claims that they're not racist would say, no, we opposed Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton because they undermined traditional American values, including role models, role models about man and woman. We weren't racist. We just didn't like this undermining of traditional Judeo-Christian norms of appropriate behavior that are supposedly the foundation of American society. That the Bible, as interpreted by the minister, does not want legal abortion, is against legal abortion. That the Bible, as interpreted by a moksa or a priest, is against allowing transgender students to participate in sports teams of their choosing on the basis of their selected gender. So they would say they're not opposed to black identity. What they're opposed to is socialism that is being advocated in the form of a big government to engage in what they call social engineering to change American society, because supposedly American society is bad because it's traditional and conservative. Traditional conservative values are bad, including, the notion that a family should be, marriage should be limited to a man and a woman. The man is typically the main authority in the family. And that, racial groups should not be forced to interact. These are very sensitive, controversial topics, right? But, okay, so let's continue here. And Kim Pyong-koo, where are you on the scale?
I'm also on agree. There have been always been like so much various problems in American history, such as like Black human rights and discrimination against non-white people. And many of those problems make politicians naturally to have their own political ideas on race issues. So they have their political DNA about in racism.
Yeah, I get, there's the question is meant to be general and broad because, what does political DNA mean? And there's a lot of different ways to try to interpret this. But before I go into that, my phone is making all this noise and it never made this. It's just, sorry for the cacao talk noise in the background there. But so let's go then to the next, see, somebody else is left to speak, I think, and that is Juliet. Juliet, where do you fit on the scale?
I also think that racism is part of the American DNA, because and with all the current events, like since George Floyd's death, we can see it, but we all
Say that again.
already could see it before his death, and I think I think it's part of the American history, because it even though other countries took part in the organization of slavery, it like geographically happened in the United States, and then southern states even wanted to. They didn't want to abandon it because it contributed to their economy. So it proved how much they depended on it and how much like racism is part of the DNA.
Yeah, we're talking about different levels of analysis, right? Somebody in the United States, somebody who supports Trump, if you call him a racist because he supports Trump, he might punch you in the face. People vehemently deny that they're racist. So what do we mean by structural racism? What we mean in terms of what my statement meant to imply that I read was that the founding of the United States was fundamentally based upon this notion of exploitation of resources, including racial resources, Black people from Africa that were, that slavery was still present in Africa, and it was expanded to North and South America, and then to exploit the resources to become prosperous for the people that wanted to exploit all these resources, including expelling the indigenous people and taking their property and taking the land for themselves. The point is that people would tend to come up with institutions to allow that to happen. And as I said earlier, it's human nature to see the world in a way that allows me to feel good about doing what I want to do. I see the world around me in a way that is self-serving. And I create institutions on the basis of my understanding of the world that I see in a self-serving way. So, for example, a lot of points have been made about how, for example, American policing, we talk about 2.2 million people in prison. American policing began 400 years ago with the creation of the first militias to enforce order against the indigenous people and to keep control of the Blacks that were brought over to provide enslaved labor to exploit the resources, agricultural resources of cotton and tobacco in the United States. Remember, at the time of the American Revolution, up to 40% of the American population was enslaved, huge percentage. So you can imagine people live in a world where enslaved Black people are everywhere, even in the North where it was less prominent. It was still not outlawed until the end of the 18th century. So it's just natural, right? And so you have a world, and you create a set of institutions and self-government on the basis of that world. And it becomes institutionalized. So, I mean, how can you have 2.2 million people in prison in America? And it goes back to notions of right versus wrong, about how if you're poor, that's not an excuse for criminal behavior. If you're poor, you're bad. You're poor because God does not like you. There's something wrong about you, not me, in society, you. And there's a tendency towards scapegoating, that people are poor because they deserve to be poor. And they're poor because God doesn't like them. God likes people that are prosperous. Remember the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism that we talked about, Max Weber, right? America was founded by those people. And it became even stronger as America developed on the basis of early commodity agriculture to supply early industrialization. And, as Seymour Martin Lipset highlights, right, that there are two countries born from the American Revolution, Independence War, Canada and the United States. But America is the place where slavery was still utilized as a foundation for early commodity agriculture to supply the textile industry and the tobacco industry, right? But particularly textiles, cotton. And so this becomes a foundation. And of course, this notion you have to have weapons, right? I mean, this was present to an important, but it became more present again with the civil rights movement, that these unhappy, restive minorities are challenging the status quo, and they are a threat. They are proponents of anarchy and un-American values, and they are rioting and demonstrating and burning down their ghettos and insulting American culture and American traditional values that made America the great country that it is. Right? So we have all these shootings. We have the tremendous amount of weapons today in the United States. We covered this earlier, right? Over 400 million guns in the United States. Mass shootings happening every day. Again, just yesterday, more, and we can't, and we don't have the political institutional capacity to stop it. And it was set up that way on purpose, because America is a country that was based upon on race-based settler colonialism and maintaining that order that then became institutionalized into the modern era. And so how does this manifest itself? It manifests itself in different ways. Like, for example, here's a news report that came out today in the New York Times that I wanted to highlight here. If I can find it here. So, this is a course on American politics, and the book covers a lot about American public opinion polls, right? American public opinion polls and And what do American people want through public opinion polls? So what are we supposed to do with public opinion polls? Like, what does that mean? So Nate Cohn, he's the head person in the New York Times for covering public opinion polls. He's their public opinion in-house survey, political science in-house paid specialist. He's been there for years. So this is an important position. He's the main political scientist doing public opinion surveys for the New York Times, Nate Cohn. So he has regular articles in the New York Times. So if you ask Americans, over 90% say they want more regulation of guns. You ask them. So I'm a college professor, or I'm a public opinion survey, and I come to you as an American household, or I call you on the phone and I ask you, do you favor more restrictions on gun ownership? And most people, over 90%, say yes. But he's now criticizing these public opinion polls because what Americans say and then what they do are different things. And voting is doing. I can say, you know, yeah, we should have more control over guns. But then when I have to walk across the street and go to a voting booth and then select, whom do I vote for? What do I do? What do I actually do? That is more a natural response to people's internalized, often implicit fears and assumptions and fears about right and wrong, good and bad, that defaults typically to supporting what exists. That I don't want to change too many things, change anything fundamentally in America because I'm afraid of what that means. I know what the current status quo is, and I know it, and I'm familiar with it, and I accept it. But to actually go and vote for a candidate that is going to limit access to guns, I said, sure, a month ago, I think we should have more restrictions on guns. But then when I actually have to do something, then at that point, that's when the stimulus response that people internalize as a result of generations and centuries of political development that they learn and internalize, that's not called explicitly racist. It's not racist in the sense that we like this because we want to oppress Black people. No, but it goes back to that foundation of America, all the way back to the beginning. You know, coming to a wild area where indigenous people are living who are threatening you. You're bringing Black people over in chains. They're dying, big portion die on the way over on boats. You're enslaving them. You're making them work. And you come up with a worldview and a set of institutions, including policing and governing, that is based upon that vested interest in that system. And ideologies that justify it and rhetorically express and justify it and defend it in the form of words, in the form of doctrine, in the form of religion, in the form of symbols that we use to influence and manipulate each other in political campaigns. So this is a report that illustrates what I'm talking about here, right? Broad public support on the issue may not be as broad for gun control, right? As Democrats hope. It is one of the most puzzling questions for Democrats in American politics. Why is the political system so unresponsive to gun violence? Expanded background checks routinely receive more than 80% or 90% support in polling. Should we check people's backgrounds? Like, should you be allowed to buy a gun if you've been arrested in the past, or you have a mental health issue that you've been put in a hospital for, or you've been convicted of a crime? Yet gun control legislation usually gets stymied in Washington. Republicans never seem to pay a political price for their opposition. There have been countless explanations offered about why political reality seems so at odds with the polling, including the power of the gun lobby, the importance of single issue voters, and the outside influence of rural states in the Senate. But there's another possibility, one that might be the most sobering of all for gun control supporters. The problem could also be the voters, the Americans, not just politicians or special interests, lobbying and pressuring politicians. When voters in 4 Democratic leaning states got the opportunity to enact expanded gun background checks into law, the overwhelming support suggested by national surveys was nowhere to be found. Instead, the initiative and referendum results in Maine, California, Washington, and Nevada were nearly identical to those of the 2016 presidential election, all the way down to the result of individual counties. So the support for referendums on background checks and like was the same, the outcome was the same as your support for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. In a county, a state, all the way down to the counties in each of those states. Remember, 3,000 counties in the United States. But here they highlighted that according to public opinion polls, more than 80 or 90% of Americans support restrictions on gun ownership, or at least background checks. But then when it actually comes time to vote, this is what the results are. And it tends to go with a vote according to the support for the Democratic Republican Party political candidates for president. It says here, Hillary Clinton fared better at the ballot box than expanded background checks in the same states, most on the same day among the same voters. So she did better than the support for background checks in the elections in 2016. The usual theories for America's conservative gun politics do not explain the poor showings. The supporters of the initiatives so the supporters of these referendum initiatives in Maine, California, Washington, and Nevada, they spent more money on the campaign than their opponents. The supporters of the referendum initiatives outspent the all-powerful gun lobby in terms of buying television time, social media time, advertisements in newspapers, political campaigning, right? All manner of voters, not just single-issue voters or politicians, got an equal say. The Senate was not to blame. Indeed, the results suggested that a national referendum on background checks would have lost. And while the question on every ballot was different and each campaign fought differently as well, the final results were largely indistinguishable from one another. So the referendum wording was different a little bit in Maine, from the one in California, from one in Washington, from the one in Nevada, but the results were all the same. This is this notion of institutionalized attitudes that go deep into Americans' collective political psychology, that have their roots in history going back hundreds of years, that people don't even realize. They may have been based in racism, but have nothing to do with formal racism today. Like 99.9% of Americans would emotionally and vehemently deny that they are racist. We are not racist. The possibility that one of the most popular policies in polling, in the 80 to 90%, could run behind Mrs. Clinton in 2016 at the ballot box raises important questions about the utility of issue polling. Like, is it worthwhile talking about? I mean, you hear it repeated over and over again. Over 90% of Americans support gun control. Why can't we implement gun control? The public opinion polls show it. Which asks voters whether they support or oppose certain policies. While these questions probably tell us something about public opinion, again, it's this question, what is public opinion? Public opinion surveys are one form of public opinion. I don't even think it's a very useful, interesting form of public opinion, right? You come and ask me, you knock on my door. Hello, voter, do you support gun control? Yeah, what does that mean? What counts as action? What counts as behavior? And what people say versus it may well be what's different from what they do, not to mention how they organize, how they demonstrate and protest, right? So they go on, he gives you some explanations to what has been suggested as what's going on here. All these theories may have merit, but the results of referendums add another possibility. The apparent progressive political majority in the polls might just be illusory. It's not because people lie. They're not lying when they tell you, I support gun control. I mean, they really think they do, but then when they go vote, they do something totally different. And because now when you have to do something, you really have to be emotionally committed to it. And voting is doing something, right? It simply may not exist for practical purposes. And the tendency of referendum results of all ideological colors to underperform the polls may portray an overlooked dimension of public opinion, a tendency to err towards the status quo. People tend to fall back on the status quo. They don't want to deal with the anxiety of change. And the act of voting to enact an initiative into law carries far more responsibility and consequence than a careful response on a survey. When in doubt, many voters may adopt a lowercase c conservative position in the ballot box. Altogether, there's no surprise that initiatives and referendums tend to underperform their support in the public opinion polls. These polls, remember, Nate Cohn, he's Mr. Public Opinion Poll, right? He is the New York Times public opinion poll expert. Those polls have shortcomings of their own. Many voters hold relatively weak views about specific policy items. They may be especially likely to say they support policies in the survey where acquiescence bias can lead response to agree with what's being asked of them. Like, you don't want to disagree with the person asking you a question. Why? Because I want to get along. I don't really care that much anyway. So I'll just say whatever I think you want me to hear, what you want to hear, what I think you want to hear. Go away. Those attitudes might shift quickly once an issue receives sustained political attention. And here's the point, the findings suggest that whatever large majorities appears to exist for background checks, individual background checks before being allowed to buy a gun, is prone to evaporate in a campaign, in the actual political struggle, as Republican-leaning voters who support gun rights can quickly be swayed with appeals to their more abstract and deeply felt concern on the issue. And I think that the same may be true about abortion, right? I mean, most Americans say they don't want abortion made illegal, but when it comes time to vote, when it comes time to do something, they don't vote on that issue. They vote on whether or not they like the political party and the political candidate that's representing them. They vote on what they trust, and what they trust is their emotion. What I like, not what I have to actually research and use logic to investigate and analyze and change the status quo. No, I like the incumbent. I like traditional American values. I like it. I feel secure with it. Gun control opponents are not the only ones who benefit from this phenomenon. Healthcare reform started out as popular. Well, he's claiming that it's not only, that there are people that do also, gun control opponents are not the only ones who benefit from this phenomenon. Healthcare reform started out as popular until the Affordable Care Act was actually proposed and debated. Then it dropped, right? It almost failed. People say, yeah, we should have some kind of universal healthcare system, but then we actually have to do something. Oh my God. Carbon taxes earned broad national support, but carbon tax initiatives in an environmentally friendly Washington state lost twice decisively. This is the most liberal state in America, right? And twice on the referendum ballot, taxes on greenhouse gas fuels failed. Twice in a referendum on the state ballot in Washington state. So, so people tend to support the status quo, even though they might say they don't. So back to please vote on this topic in the time remaining on whether or not you think racism is in America's political DNA. So please vote if you haven't already done so. So 5 people have voted there. And let's see, is there anything else to vote on here? And so is American exceptionalism obsolete? And so you can vote on that as well, on whether or not you think American exceptionalism is obsolete in 2022. Is America in decline, in other words? America is never going to solve its gun problem. It's the Chinese model is the future in going into the 21st century with climate change and global crises, that America is not the wave of the future. The American model is not the wave of the future. America is in decline, as Xi Jinping has argued. And Also in this one, please respond to the following statement. Science, not religion, should be the primary driver behind making public policy. Do you agree, disagree? That science should be the driver of public policy, the primary driver, not religion, not Protestantism, not Catholicism, not evangelical Christianity, science. And I think this is a mistake from, I put this in the wrong place here. Okay, well, that's it for today, okay? So thank you.
Professor,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What about the debate? Because was it Kim Chu-young? He didn't come to class.
Okay,
and also the
I
debate
told you,
is
I'll be your opponent. Okay,
so next class or
yeah, Wednesday, yeah.
okay.
See you in
I
class.
have, Professor, I have another
Yeah.
question. I just arrived 5 minutes late, but I didn't do the attendance. But could you like change that, please?
Okay, okay.
Thank you. Thank you
Okay,
very
anything
much.
else? If not, bye.